Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets are now on a 3-game winning streak, thanks in large part to the efforts of one Mikal Bridges. We break down the evolution of his game since coming to the Brooklyn Nets, the debut of Nerlens Noel, and what this team is trying to build consistently on both ends of the floor.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, this is a celebration. It's the culmination of all the efforts of this team. We said coming off that great victory over Boston, the big comeback win, obviously. But you looked at the next 2 games. This is the start of the road trip. You needed to win these if you wanted to feel like you could validate the sense that this team is certainly at least in the middle of the pack and better than some of these lower level teams in the NBA.
Yeah, like it wasn't long ago before or when we were probably thinking about the play-in. I think it's definitely still on the table, but just like starting to do the math around the lottery a little bit, right? When they're down 1 million points to the Celtics in the second quarter, you're starting to do that little mental math about what's going on here. They've completely at least righted that ship, won their 3rd game in a row. Bridges, who we're going to talk about at length, I'm sure, has been amazing. Way better, I think, than even the loftiest expectations around Bridges, and he's the real story, obviously. But they really, we also knew when we looked at the schedule that not necessarily the Celtics, but these next 2 games, the Charlotte game and this Rockets game, were like sort of must wins no matter what the circumstances around the team are.
100%.
Or team was. So to see them kind of go in both places and just take care of business has been a nice. It's like been a nice palate cleanser for sure, because it was looking a little rough. And these are just the teams. These are the teams you kind of get right against, and they were able to do that. And you really couldn't ask for more. So we'll break down the game and Bridges specifically, but just in terms of the short term, this was exactly what needed to happen for a team that really could have really entered a tailspin. I can't understate it. Like second quarter of that Celtics game was tailspin time. And not only did they not do it, they had one of the best wins of the league in that game, the year in that game. And then have taken care of business against these 2 crap teams over the last 2. And that's just from an NBA team standpoint, that's what decent teams do.
And it was the sentiment from Cam Johnson, which obviously sounds more robust when you complete a comeback like that against Boston. The sentiment after the first quarter was, we're not going down like this. We're going to show what we're capable of. And there's been a lot of that sentiment around Mikal Bridges, Johnson, just this team in general, right? Jock Vaughn mentioned the fight, kind of getting a sense of like, what is Mikal Bridges made of? Well, he's a guy that as he takes these knocks and bruises, why has he been such a consistent NBA player in terms of being able to show up game in and game out? Because he plays through the little injuries, right? Because he wants to finish them out, the gamer mentality that we talk about. So it's pretty important, to your point. Like it's almost critical to not lose games against 2 very bad teams in the league. And you talk about it all the time of, listen, no team in the NBA is horrible in terms of talent. They all have talented players. They're all NBA caliber players. And also, at this stage of the season, when you look at the record of the Hornets, you look at the record of the Houston Rockets, you need to win these games. And at the center of it is Mikal Bridges, who, I mean, listen, I've said this a couple of times before, and sometimes my instincts can be off. I can be bullish about a player that doesn't necessarily pan out. But when we had the discussion about what can Mikal Bridges be, right? And we were just having the conversation around, well, 23, 24, 26-point score, 30-point score, that would put him in a certain category inside the NBA. And in tonight's game, in addition to having another 30-point performance for himself in this one, he also accomplished something for the first time in NBA history. He's the first player in the history of the league to post a 50, 40, 90 line across the first 10 games with a new team. And it very much does feel like the unwrapping of this other layer of his game when he's considered to be the best player on a team, as opposed to what he was in Phoenix, a supporting cast member. I didn't think that it could be this good, 40, 50, 40, 90 kind of line. Just one game ago, a 50, 50, 90 line. But I at least seemed like the skill set was there to evolve and show it. Now it's probably the really cherry on top about this is that he's doing it while the team is also winning basketball games, because that's kind of the contrast to use a player on this Nets team. Big performances from Cam Thomas, but not wins. Mikal Bridges is giving big performances and leading the team to wins.
Yeah, man, there's like a bunch of different ways to have you look good in the stats. There's empty calorie stats. We've seen guys, time immemorial just be able to go out on the NBA court, and if they're just given, enough shots, they're just going to put up stats that are going to be eye popping. I mean, Nets might have a guy like this in the roster right now, actually, who maybe we'll get to later in the show. But like, and then there's guys who can go out and efficiently score, and like you said, you actually go out and win games. And that's not a dig on Cam, but like, what we're saying here about Mikal is that there was another level of his game. It had to get there. We're going to hear us say this a million times, so I don't actually care about saying this. We're going to be a broken record because it's going to be the story for the next couple of years. The whole key to the Durant trade was him being good. Everything else, whatever comes later, like the draft picks and whatever else. The key to the Durant trade even being a semblance of like equal or fair for what you gave up had to rely on Bridges taking a leap. Now, in our mind, that leap was going to be like, hey, next year, feet wet, like we got a little bit of a different roster around the team. We'll kind of see how it goes. I don't think anybody, even no matter how lofty you were on expectations on Mikal Bridges, saw this coming. No. Like this is just, it's ridiculous in a good way. He's top 10 since the 14. So the last 8 games, he's top 10 in the league in scoring. Top 10. And by the way, and the other names aren't like just some like run hot Larrys that are kind of just piling numbers on. Like the other guys in this group are like Lillard, SGA, Doncic, Embiid, right? Like that's the group. So that he's just even existing within this group and they have W's on the back of it. Like we're seeing a leap. It's really, really cool. It's very rare that you get to actually sit, especially when they're on your team and you're rooting for it and watching every night, that you actually get to sit there and watch a guy who did not have these kind of expectations. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got this guy.
My.
Think about the guys that are like this. Like I'm not directly comparing him to these guys, but this is like sort of what happened with guys like Kawhi, right? Or PG. Yeah, really like these guys that were, look, they were touted high draft picks, whatever, that were, drafted for one reason. And let's see if they can kind of get to the next level on some other things. Like Bridges is like along that same kind of arc is like, because remember, Kawhi was like a defensive specialist when he came in, right? Mm-hmm. Like that was his thing. So to watch it happen in real time in front of you is just awesome. And we're seeing it. We're seeing a leap. Like we're seeing a superstar leap happening right in front of us.
The Brooklyn Nets win this game 118-96. Coming up here in a second, I'm actually going to highlight another key stat from Mikal Bridges relative to what he was doing in Phoenix and why it's actually another critical component to the game, to his game, and why this team is having so much success over these last 3 games specifically. Before we do that, though, Doug, gotta tell you about a little bit of a sponsor here, and that's going to be the Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. If you have ever thought about being an NBA GM managing a basketball franchise, this is what I used to do on my Xbox with NBA 2K, with NBA whatever version of it. I loved franchise mode over there. Now with Ultimate Pro Basketball GM, you get to manage every single aspect of launching a franchise, hiring the coaches, the assistants, training and trading players, making draft picks, navigating the franchise through free agency and the draft, and of course, all the ups and downs of the season. I am right now sitting in my draft with the number 1 overall pick, debating whether or not I trade back 3 spots and pick up 2 critical players to improve my roster. This is life and death kind of stuff, my friends. And that is what I am trying to figure out on my end. And you can be a part of it too. Locked On Nets. listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when they use promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, you just visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up in the App Store. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. And speaking of starting things today, Doug, the other stat that I thought was really important about this, you and I, when we discussed Cam Thomas and what his game was, one of the things that we highlighted was the idea that he's a player that can get downhill, attack at the basket, and draw fouls. And something that's pretty unique to the skill set of players on this team. Mikal Bridges, over the entirety of this season, when he played with Phoenix, had more than 7 or more free throw attempts 6 times before the trade to the Brooklyn Nets. Since that trade, he has now eclipsed that number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. He's matched the number of trips to the foul line in Brooklyn that he had in the entirety of his season with the Phoenix Suns. And he's done it now over these last 5 games specifically, going back to the Milwaukee loss, 7, 8, 9, 8, and 8 trips. And oh, by the way, he knocks it down at an incredibly high clip. That aspect of his game, specifically to this team, is actually pretty critical. Because the Brooklyn Nets have issues around some of their bigs and being able to knock down free throws. Even guys that you would consider by NBA metrics of, if you can shoot great three-pointers, then you're going to be a guy that goes to the line successfully. Curry can do that. Joe Harris doesn't really do that so well. Some of the other stretches, the bigs, the power forwards, they don't do it so well. So the fact that this is also a player that's doing it from the outside, the inside, giving a little bit of facilitation as well, obviously. We know that he leans into the mid-range game. But he's drawing fouls going to the line and then punishing the other team. Those are free points and something that the Nets in the post-trade era, I really had a concern around. Can you get those free points when they're available to you? Mikal Bridges is also executing that at a high level too.
Yeah, look, this is what I was saying before the break, was just talking about what happens to players when they start to make certain leaps, right, in terms of their overall offensive game. And these are the kinds of stats that happen. One is just getting an increase of shots, but not seeing a decrease in efficiency. That's one. Usually with volume, you're going to see decrease in efficiency. It's just because you take more shots. That's just usually going to happen. Usually just means your shots are tougher. It's not that you get worse. It's just that if you're better, the shots are tougher. That's typically
double
how
team, better defenders getting matched up on you because you're the best player now. Yeah.
Yes. When you play with Phoenix, you're not going to see the other team's best defender. That's going to go to Devin Booker. It's going to be on Chris Paul to some degree. You're just not going to see those guys' best defender. When you play with Kevin Durant, you're not going to see the other team's best defender. That's just not how it's going to go. So when you see an increase in opportunity, typically it's because it's warranted. And then also because, it's warranted because you're good enough. And then what's going to happen is that it's going to beget you getting some other worst just sort of matchups. But then also if you're able to press the issue, right? Get to the free throw line, understand that you can have body control in the lane, which he already really has. If you can operate in the mid range, that's going to be problems for other teams, which he's showing he can do. There are lots of little other parts to his game that show you that we probably actually haven't even hit the ceiling yet. Right. And it's whatever. It's, I referenced the last 8 games. It's been, I can't remember exactly how many games he's been on the team so far. I should just have this queued up. So he's been on the team. Yeah. Right. So 10 games. I actually think that what we're seeing in terms of his overall skill set, getting to the line a little bit more, shooting threes at a really high clip. You said we've rounded up as 50% from 3 over this stretch. These are the signs of a guy that has another level. And yeah. I think before, when we talked about a whole season next year of this role, where he can land statistically, it's definitely higher than where we predicted. I can't remember where we landed on this, 25 a game or something like that. That's a good round number, but right? Do you think this is the ceiling for him right now? I think there's another level. I think that he's showing that he has another level to it, and he's just starting to explore what it is, it feels like.
Yeah, you and I were debating, because I remember at the time you were pulling up here's where the scoring would be, right? If you're going to be a 27, 28, 29 point scorer, you're going to be a top 10 guy in the league. Saying 23, 24 was still going to be a top 20, and I think we were debating one more 3-pointer a game, right? 24 versus 27 or 22 versus 25. But that's the thing about this 5-game stretch here too. And it's funny because prior to this game, I'd started to look at certain stats just in terms of what he was doing and how he's producing. Now you can listen, on the one hand, you could make the argument you play 2 bad teams and that's going to help you produce better numbers. But actually tonight, ironically, he was a 50-50, 90 guy before tonight where he went 4 of 10 from beyond the arc, and that actually brought his numbers down. But even when you go back to those games where they lost against Milwaukee, against Atlanta, they didn't win against Miami. It was the 45-point performance. But he had put up 31 and 24 against Milwaukee and Atlanta, respectively. One team that's not so good defensively, one team that can give you a lot of problems defensively. There's some sample size here now that suggests this is a guy that can be, pretty matchup proof to whatever level. Is he superstar top 3 player in the league? No. But the idea that in a given game now, teams are going to say, biggest defensive assignment, it's going to go at Mikal Bridges. And Mikal Bridges is showcasing that he can still produce with consistency. I said this over the 5 games coming into this one. And these are a big bulk number of stats that are worth throwing out. Before this game, he came into it with the 6th best free throw percentage because he's knocking it down at an incredibly high clip. The rebounds per game. And by the way, when I mention some of these rankings, it's worth noting that these are some of the supplemental areas that you worry about with a player like this when he's producing on the offensive end. 15th in rebounds, 15th in rebounds per game, 10th in total rebounds over that stretch, 16th in assists, 7th in steals, 6th in blocks, and then turnovers, which I think is also another key category here. He was 4th in turnovers over the 5 games leading into this one, and the 3 players that were ahead of him on the list over that 5 games had played 1 game. So that tells you he's actually the best in terms of turnovers. So you think about protecting the basketball, producing at a high level, being good enough that you can lean into. And I talked about this on 2 episodes ago about being good enough that you can actually define. He mentioned this in a post-game press conference when asked about going into the mid-range game. Yes, the analytics tell you 3 points is always more than 2, and that's the volume you want to shoot on. Unless you are good enough and you play at a high enough level in the mid-range game that you can go to that well with consistency. So there's an incredible sample size here. And just to your point, no, I did not think I was going to turn around and say 4 to the last 5 games, Mikal Bridges has scored 30 or more points for the Brooklyn Nets. But it does make you dream on what this organization can try to do in the offseason to add another kind of key player around this. Because this is not a complete roster by any stretch, and Mikal is still producing like he is.
And I want to be really clear about something, and I think I know I speak for both of us here. We spent a lot of time talking about Mikal here in a win where, Spencer Dinwiddie scored 23, Claxton was an absolute defensive force. There's other things that are aspects of this game that this is not to gloss over those. The reason we're spending this much time on Mikal here is because unlike those other guys and they had great games, this is actually less about this game and more about the future. The Nets have we're making the case that the Nets are showing, Mikal Bridges is showing in the short term here that they have a superstar in their hands. There's no world where Dinwiddie's a good player. I like Dinwiddie a lot, whatever. Not whatever. I like Dinwiddie a lot. These guys aren't superstars. Bridges is a potential superstar. It's actually in some ways we're probably not making a big enough deal about it. Right. And because when we're looking toward the future and how the team is built, you're starting to see glimpses of how a team can be built sort of around him, right? The other guys are really good complementary players, and we have enough of a sample size of their game to sort of know where they're going to land, right? Claxton, does he have another level? Probably. Dinwiddie, we pretty much know who he is. He's a good player on a good team. That's what he is, right? So, but Bridges, the reason we're spending this much time talking about it, and frankly, we're probably spending a lot more time talking about him, is because, like we said before, when you're watching the possibility of a superstar ascension, he actually has that DNA now. He has the superstar DNA, and we probably are going to be able to watch it in real time, and those other guys don't. And so that's just why we're landing on it's more of a high level thing than this one game. Those other guys were really good. It was a nice win. It's not that we're not glossing over these guys because of that. It's just that I think we're getting a rare chance to see something happening in front of us, and I want to make sure we're appreciating it.
And frankly, to tie a bow on it, remember, we heard about the pass-through opportunity, teams maybe being willing to send 4 first-round picks to the Nets in exchange for Mikal Bridges, right? So GMs, teams around the league, I think maybe knew, we would not, from an insider NBA perspective, what this player could be capable of if you elevated into that higher role. But most importantly, you said it in the first segment, when you trade away Kevin Durant, the players you get back, hey, the totality is great. And you can look at the picks and say, well, at least we know we can rebuild this thing. But when you can look at a 26-year-old, when you trade away a 34-year-old, and you can look at a 26-year-old player and say, we could have a legitimate superstar on our hands that we also have under contract for years to come, it changes the entire outlook around this team going beyond this season in a way that should get Brooklyn Nets fans really excited.
All right, when we come back from the break, we will talk a little bit about the rotation here as well. Some interesting stuff, not some interesting, some not so great stuff that happened in this game. We'll talk a little bit about the games from some of the other guys we mentioned as well. We'll do that right after this. Got to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. We're headed toward the playoffs here for the NBA. We're the final fourth of the season, and now is the perfect time to download the FanDuel Sports app. It's America's #1 sports book. New customers are going to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. All those bees, baby. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You bet on everything from the money line to point scores, threes, drained, rebounds, assists. They got it all in there. You pile it together for a same game parlay. You can get in there, like you said, you can do the different player props. You can put, if you get all in the same game, you can put it all together to really increase your odds. You can go to 2x3, 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. You can really get granular on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's just awesome. Once you get in there, you're going to see what I mean. Lets you combine those bets for a chance at a bigger payout. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And after that, Nets fans, we got to tell you, we've been telling you about this for a while. I saw someone pop into chat the other day and mention this too with the Mission Burrito. And maybe you didn't know what they meant at the time. You're going to know right now. The best Cali Mexican food in the area. That's our friends over at Brooklyn Borough. If you haven't tried Brooklyn Borough before or after a Nets game, you don't know what you're missing. Next time in your area, you go to 922 Fulton Street, just a few stops away from the Barclays, under a mile. You're gonna smell the aromas before you even get there. The hearty taste is going to draw you in. It's San Francisco Mission District burritos, off the charts. They got tacos, they got the bowls, they got the quesadillas, they got stuff named after our boy Joe Harris. Pepe and friends know how to do it right at Brooklyn Borough. And the deal you're going to get, this is what you do. You go in there, top of your lungs, you scream Locked On Nets. That's all you got to do. And they're going to start throwing burritos your way. That's because you're going to get a free baby burrito with the purchase of a Mission burrito if you tell them that you're a Locked On Nets fan when you're ordering. It's not just the burritos, baby, too. They got the salsa bar. They got ice cold cervezas, tasty margaritas, everything. The ambiance, the food, and more. Brooklyn Borough, 922 Fulton Street. Map it or check it out on Yelp. You're going to see all the reviews as well. Going to call you in there. Get those directions. Read the reviews. Brooklyn Borough brings original San Francisco Mission District burritos and delicious Cali Mexican favorites right to you in Brooklyn. Brooklyn Borough. Order, unwrap, enjoy, unwrap more. Finish, come back, smile.
Going to need that Bridges burrito from Pepe, I think. So we'll go ahead and reach.
It's going to be a monster, baby.
It's going to be enormous, and it's going to be sizable. Okay, as we then think about this game in a couple of different aspects, it's funny. You mentioned about guys we're not glossing over, but highlighting Mikal Bridges is really important after this handful of games that we've seen from him. It's also been really nice. I think we'll talk about Claxton here. I want to mention Nerlens Noel, who gave there's things that I liked about his game, and it's also like one of those sweet sample sizes that looks strikingly similar to like a Day'Ron Sharpe kind of stat line with the fouls to points ratio. But Spencer Dinwiddie, I do want to just kind of give this nod here because a handful of games ago, we were saying where, boy, Spencer, back in Brooklyn, we love you, but we are getting this hero ball kind of mentality, not necessarily showing me balance in your game on both ends of the floor. You need to be a facilitator, setting guys up. But he really has been the number 2 complement here across these last handful. 23 in this game, 24 and 17 the 2 games prior. But even most importantly, only 4 assists in this one. Actually messed up a little bit of a parlay I had going on tonight. But 8, 8, and 10 in terms of assists the 3 games prior. Like, he's a veteran player. You mentioned it. This is not a guy that's going to turn into a superstar. He's a good player on a good team. And guess what? With Mikal Bridges, this can be a good team and he can be a very good complementary player. Like, I've really liked the games that he's put together going back to that Boston.
Yeah, no, like I said, it's not, just because you don't mention someone doesn't mean that you have an out for the guy. It's just like, This is just, there's a certain, with every NBA team, there's a certain hierarchy, and the hierarchy, it's actually better, frankly, when the hierarchy is defined. Usually teams like that tend to have a little more success when there's a very clear hierarchy of talent, just because that's sort of how the game works, right? And the better teams sort of understand that, as long as everyone's like of the requisite talent, right? And so that's why it's like worth it to mention Mikal first. Now, and with Dinwiddie too, it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. I think the contributions have been really good. The $21 million a year is only partially guaranteed, so I'm not exactly sure like what. I mean, my guess is he's on the team all next year, and depending on where they are, he's either like a trade candidate or they're thinking about re-signing him. Though I'm not sure he's going to totally fit their timeline. It's not like my favorite game, like stylistically. I don't know if it's my favorite, just because it's just a little ISO heavy. He is good at getting to the rim. He has worked really well in the past with good rim running centers that have good hands. Like the Nets don't have that totally right now, and so that's like a little weird. But so I think actually his game would look a lot better if he had like a really good screener and a really good roller. And the Nets don't really have like that in there. Like Claxton and Nerlens Noel now, I guess, just like really aren't that guy. But in terms of like, in terms of what he did, it's hard to like give him like massive praise, but you're never going to take a dig at him. He's just a really, really good player. It's good. He is the reason that, or he is a big reason beyond Bridges about why they're putting these win streaks together. He is a stabilizer for the most part. He can kind of like right the ship on offense if things are not going well, because he can get to the basket and create his own shot. He's not a mid-range guy, but he does want to get to the hoop. He thinks he's been fouled in every single shot he's ever taken in his whole life. But which is always my it's my least favorite thing in the whole world. It drives me nuts. I get everyone does it, so who cares?
He put his hands behind his back, like like the slow stroll you do when you're like just walking down the beach or the boardwalk with your favorite gal. He put his hands behind his back to show just like, I'm not here to be the aggressor, but I'd love to have a long-term discussion about the recent call on the court. He does it in a variety of ways, and it's all beautiful.
It's just competitive, and a lot of guys do it. He does it more than a lot of other guys, but he takes a lot of shots. Anyway, yeah, his game, it's been good. And you mentioned Nerlens. Look, the guy hadn't played in a month, so I don't know. Like the expectations couldn't have been really high. It's clear that the Nets want to see what they have on the 10-day. Let me ask you a question though, just because we're starting to get out of here, and we're just gonna finish this off. I'm sure I know you're talking to Kane Pittman from the Bucks tomorrow, so we're not going to get a chance to talk about it maybe before maybe all the way to the end of the week. The Cam Thomas thing, he played 0 minutes tonight. Like it's been 24 minutes, 7 minutes, 7 minutes, 0. Didn't even get garbage time run. Like this was a blowout, and they kind of kept some rotation-y guys in for the blowout. Like he's like fully and completely buried. I mean, is this like the weirdest thing ever? Like, did you ever see that in the old? Did you see the Bridges thing coming? Did you see the Cam thing coming here at all? Like, for going after the run he had. I mean, I get not starting him, but I mean, like 2 weeks ago, we were like, hey, should he start? He doesn't even play anymore. He's out of the rotation.
Yeah, and you know what, man? Like, and I hate to do it. I hate to put it in this context. But if you go back to when Jacques Vaughn said, hey, by the way, though, we lost 2 out of 3 of those games. And we said nobody was playing those games. It's really hard to put it in that kind of container. Combine that with, though, the Nets winning basketball games when he's not playing. We've said this before. We don't know what it is, but something's clearly going on here. We've talked about, the complete game. We both agreed. He has shown flashes of doing all of the right things, especially offensively, making the extra pass, even when maybe he has an open look, giving the feed, finding an open shooter on the perimeter. Like he's done a lot of the little things well. I have to assume that there is something going on here that has almost nothing to do with basketball. Whether it's attitude, whether it's this idea of resetting this culture and bringing in guys like Johnson and Bridges, Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, all very highly regarded guys in terms of attitude, buy-in, commitment, work ethic, right? Like all of those boxes get checked with these players that they've brought in. Other than that, yes, I find it incredibly shocking that he cannot have a role on a team that is bereft of talent when it comes to having an off-the-bench scorer, a spark plug player, backcourt players that can do things with the ball in their hand. In terms of needs, The Nets need a guy like Cam Thomas. So there must be something else going on here. And the organization seems willing to sacrifice potentially games, wins and losses by sending a message to him. I honestly, if you ask me right now, I would say that this is trending in the direction of Cam Thomas, who has showcased what his talent is, being far more likely as a part of a package to improve this new version of the team than being a part of this team going forward.
Yeah, it's just the weirdest thing. I don't know. I know that like there was context around the huge games, and he was sort of unleashed in those games to just shoot as many times as he wanted to. Go ahead.
No, this. I'm derailing our conversation in a lot of ways. I did not know this. I don't know if Nets fans knew this. I heard this on the broadcast. Edmund Sumner had a child.
Oh, yeah.
That is why he missed the last handful of games. To put it in context, because maybe it does tie into Cam Thomas has been playing well. You're not playing Edmund Sumner at all. Like, I just do wonder here now going forward, maybe we'll see healthy scratches for Edmund Sumner. If all of a sudden he works his way into this backcourt rotation, that'll also just kind of crystallize maybe what the Nets would have preferred to have done coming out of this trade scenario. Maybe the Cam Thomas minutes and the performances were merely a product of necessity as opposed to what they would have liked the design to be.
Yeah. I thought you and I had talked about it. I had talked about it for a while on the podcast the other day about the Sumner thing. That was good. Okay, good. He was out. Yeah, he was out for personal reasons. But that was specifically was the reason. But yeah, with Cam, I think that's actually, and we'll close on this. I think that's a good point. I do wonder if the circumstances made it actually the optics on this look worse because I wonder, like you said, like I wonder if it just wasn't part of the plan. They had to do it because they had nobody, right? Like they had nobody during these trade deadline stuff, and they needed bodies. And he was like, "Hey, I'm go out there and I'll shoot 30 times. Like it's fine." And then and maybe put them like in a somewhat weird spot when that wasn't really what they wanted to do to begin with, right? And he kind of played his way so well that it looks super weird, but maybe to them it doesn't look weird at all. It's like, hey, that wasn't part of the plan. And so
we never wanted to use them. We kind of knew we could do this from a scoring perspective, and now it makes it look even weirder that he can do that, and we don't seem to feel like we want to use him.
Well, it for sure looks weird. There's no doubt about that. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. Appreciate everyone jumping into YouTube. We'll spend a few extra minutes in YouTube. The later games get a little dicey with that, but we will spend a few extra minutes in YouTube. So if you have a question, queue it up at Locked On Nets. If you're over on the podcast feed, make sure you subscribe to YouTube. We're climbing towards 6,000 now. That's the new goal, 6,000. I'm not gonna sleep. I literally won't sleep. Literally and figuratively. Until we hit 6,000. So it's gonna get weird here on the podcast. You're gonna see it. You're gonna see it in my face. Get us to 6,000 over on YouTube. Subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube.
Look, talent comes everywhere, but having something to say and a way to say it to have people listen to it, that's a whole other bag. And unless you get out and you try to do it, you'll never know. That's just the truth. And that's Jackson Maine from A Star Is Born.
Oh. R.I.P. I think, right? He died. Spoiler alert, he died.
I hadn't seen it. I was just getting around to it.
Don't bother. He dies. All right. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Post-podcast. Real bummer. That guy died. If I knew who Jackson Maine was in that movie, then it might bum me out, but I actually don't know anything about it.
I'm actually not sure. The only reason I know is because my wife told me about the movie, and I had no interest in seeing it. But I'll look it up.
I'd love to wanna, but I don't. So anyway, you're an over.
That's him. That's the main character, Bradley Cooper's character. Anyway, he's dead.
He's dead.
All right,
he's dead and gone. Anyway, bury him. If you're in a conversation, you can do what we're seeing right here, which is say at Locked On Nets, and then we'll bring you up.
This is a great question. This is gonna get people real mad.
Can we discuss? Is it possible that Sean Marks might actually be a great GM?
Okay.
I'll tell you what. I'm going to tell you right now, it's beautiful.
I have an answer for this. This is so funny. I think Sean Marks is like really good at certain aspects of this thing that I can actually pretty much say. I think he has like, he's a pretty definitive guy that when he gets something he wants to do, he does it and stands by it. And I think I think he's good at I think he's good at setting up a system of with player personnel to be able to for talent evaluate. I think he's been pretty good about finding guys that have been undervalued. He's done that very consistently. Bridges is just another example here. This would be along that trajectory of Marks having figured this guy out. When they get to the Nets, they're more valuable. Sorry, when they get to the Nets and they leave, they're more valuable than when they got there. The Nets have a pretty good history with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to call him a great GM based on how it went with Kyrie, KD, and Harden. There's just no way. It'll always be on the resume. I know we can make up a million excuses that it's them and this. And look, it probably helps him to some degree that all those guys after this year are going to be on their 4th and 5th teams, right? Because Kyrie, I'd be shocked if he landed back in Dallas. KD will stay in Phoenix, but that's his 4th team. And Harden, I mean, he's already on number 4. I mean, I know OKC wasn't his fault necessarily. But he might go back to Houston. So and we're just going to count that as a new team if he does it, because it's another team move. So that does help the Marks thing. It's hey, these guys, it doesn't matter where they land, they want to move. At the same time, he botched that so bad with understanding what was needed and how to placate them and everything else. So I think from that standpoint, it's really hard to call him a GM. And he was the one that signed those guys too, and kind of didn't know what to do when he had them. That's on the GM too.
You know, it's fun. Well, and by the way, if Mikal Bridges turns out to be a star, well, then listen, whole other script you've written. But what I will say is, I think that he is a GM at a minimum. He's a GM that has convictions about what he believes, the way that he wants to do something. And just to your point, when you bring in stars, as every GM should, you need to be flexible around those convictions. And Sean Marks seemed to be a little bit unflinching in those, and that caused a lot of problems. Can I
say one more thing about that?
Yeah.
I'll say one more thing about Marks, and then we'll move on. I will say that almost every move he made contextually in the moment, I agreed with.
Yep.
I think actually the only one I didn't agree with, I'm trying to think, I disagreed with their stance on Kyrie at first. You and I disagreed about that. Which is fine. I would have come on the wrong side of the narrative on that one anyway. So whatever, I get why he did it. There was other things I would have brought back Kyrie way earlier. But that one we can disagree about. Other than that, I don't think I ever in the moment questioned a lot of his moves. Maybe re-signing Patty Mills for 2 years was a little weird, a head scratcher at the time. And we were kind of oh, that's a little weird. Not trading Seth Curry at the trade deadline, a little weird. But for the most part, if we look back at all the moves they did, we liked them all contextually at the time. So, and then some of them just, results based didn't work out.
What was that? Yeah, I saw the other one that you had starred up here.
Oh, sorry. I'll bring it up there. I think this is what's the likelihood we hold the 6th seed? I actually think I think it's going to be close. And I think that they probably do it. But I don't think it's a lock. They're 2.5 up on the Heat right now. The Heat are not going to go away. The Hawks have lost a couple in a row. They have a new coach. They're playing a few little different rotations now. They're 3 games, but it's really just that 7 seed. So, I guess what you're saying is to stay out of the play-in. I think that they will hold it if I had a bet now, but I think it's probably more like a coin flip. That's kind of where I put it now.
Yeah, and it's funny too, man, because these last 3 games have been great, and the last 2 games specifically were games you demanded that they should go win. Just as a reminder, this was the start of the road trip. Milwaukee, Timberwolves, Nuggets, OKC. You come back home, it's the Kings, it's the Nuggets, and it's 2 games against the Cavs, right? So, and then Miami. It doesn't get easier here. There's some nice softer landing spots with Orlando and Houston down there, but there's going to be ebbs and flows. This team plays well in certain games and struggles in others, and I don't, I'm going to leave it open-ended at this point, and I want to be someone that puts my foot in the ground. They can hold on to that, and I'm certainly I feel better about it after these last 3 games than we did going back to the games prior.
That game in Miami, real quick, that game in Miami is a huge one.
Might be the decider.
It could be. It actually, I mean, it's there's still a bunch of games after that, but and they actually have a pretty soft landing after that game because it's Orlando, Houston, Atlanta, Utah, and Utah's gonna be definitely trying to lose at that point. And they get Detroit and Orlando, and then probably a Philly team that's unlikely to be playing for much at the end. After that Miami game, it gets really pretty easy for them. I bet you at the time we're staring at that game of like, this is going to kind of decide it.
Right,
Like
2.5 game lead right now. Maybe they start to close that gap, and you can take it from a half game to 1.5 with a win.
Because
over
I think
Miami.
that would give him the tiebreaker too. I think that would give him the season series because they just beat him. And so, yeah, I think that game might be one of the biggest of the year.
I'm going to tap this one real quick before we get to what I think is a more interesting one. This is the one that I meant. That's a mean assumption by me, trading Cam Thomas. Again, if you're going to, Sean Marks, Joe Tsai, this organization, if we're going to agree that things are going to look different going forward when you bring in these 4 new players, and at least 3 of them, you think, with Dorian Finney-Smith and his team-friendly contract are going to be here for a couple of seasons, like, and all bets have to be off the table about how they may reconstruct this roster and the things that can help them improve the roster without sacrificing that future capital they got back, specifically in the trade with Kevin Durant and the Phoenix Suns. Like, the last thing the Nets, I think, are going to want to do is turn around and compile a bunch of first-round picks to go get player X. Like, they just came out of doing that. They want to be able to try to be competitive and build and not sacrifice being able to also bring in more talent if it doesn't quite get across whatever the goal is for that team. So it's just reality, man. I'd be happy to have Cam Thomas here, by the way. He's a guy that showed he can score 40 points a night. It's just whether or not you put the other pieces around that make it possible to say to Cam Thomas, this is your role, this is how you produce for us, and you need to be, 1, committed to it, and 2, accepting of it. Like, that's, I think, what we're dealing with right now when it comes to Cam.
I also just think too, like if you wanted to if you wanted to trade him, it doesn't make sense to bury him either. So I think I just find the whole situation. I find the whole situation pretty weird. Did you say you had another one that you liked?
This was the other one. I thought this is just a good question. What do you think Bridges needs to add to his game to become a more elite player? I mean, what you want to say, like the attacking towards the basket, like, he draws fouls, but not necessarily in the going downhill, like taking guys off the dribble. I think maybe that would be the one thing that I would point to, but the perimeter shooting is there. The mid-range game is there. He's a high-level defensive player as well. And, for the position that he plays, for the size that he plays at, I can say as this roster evolves, I'd love to see him be a guy that's closer to 5 or 6 assists than 2 or 3 assists per game. But these are like little add-ins. He's a pretty complete player right now.
Yeah, I would go a little different direction with this. I think that it's very clear to me what it is, and he's not strong enough. And if you just compare him,
being stronger, yeah,
like that, and I'm not sure he can get there all the way on the type of body he has. It's not totally clear, and just by comparison, I mentioned Kawhi and I mentioned PG before, and I wasn't merely making direct comparisons to them because I don't think they're analogs for his game. But if you just look at like what a lot of these like wing heavy guys, not heavy guys, but like guys that are bigger wings that are like, primary scorers, what they all have on him that he doesn't have right now is they're just a lot stronger than he is. And they're just because they're just bigger, and not because they're like necessarily taller, but like they just have more mass that's just going to be able to like allow them to operate better around the rim. They're going to be able to just control their body more in the rim. Like Kawhi outweighs him by 20 pounds, right? Like same, he's 15 pounds lighter than Paul George, right? Like, so I just think that like, he's been in the league a long time. I don't know if this is just his body type. It might be like, it's fine. It's not a knock on him. I would say that to me separates him from some of these other guys right now is I just don't think like the core overall strength is there on offense. And that's definitely a nitpick, but like but I would say that it does separate him to some degree. Like even look at a guy like Tatum. Like Tatum and him are listed like near the same weights, but no, you wouldn't put them in the same class.
Right.
Exactly. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't put them side by side in the sort of the same strength class. And I would say that is a separation point for me on the type of player he is. And again, that's just like really nitpicking just because it was asked,
You had highlighted this one as well. Is there any chance you guys can invite a player, coach, or Sean Marks to come on the podcast? You never know if you don't ask, You
do know if you ask, and it's a lot of times no. I will say the Nets, just in this circle, I'm just going to answer this because this is good for podcast people to know. The Nets media circle is a very closed ring. And they're everyone's nice and it's not that. It's just that this is a closed group that's really curated. In terms of like who they allow to speak to what and who speaks to who. And that's just kind of how it is with the Nets. So that's just a That's just how the sausage is made kind of thing. But that's
we do the work though. We send our cordial invitations, and certainly it'd be something
our polite asks. Our polite asks.
Yeah, very nothing but polite asks on our end. Anybody else that wants to get in on it? I'm going to read one thing I don't always do. It's just like proofread some of these before I throw them up. I've been known to throw up an expletive or two on the old timeline, although Jay has usually been a good guy when it comes to this. Okay. Yeah, I trust you, buddy. I believe that not moving Seth Curry actually cost the Nets the ability to go after restricted free agent in the summer because they remain slightly over the cap. Yeah, but he'll be off the books in the summer, so that won't matter. Like the only thing that hindered was making Doug and I happy. That was the real hindrance in the short term. He's money on the books. Maybe you can get an asset for him. Once he's gone, that won't, unless I'm misreading the way the finances are going to work, that's not going to change what they can do this offseason. I said this on 2 podcasts ago. The biggest concern for the Brooklyn Nets going this offseason is what's going to go on with Ben Simmons, because the impending contract extension for Cam Johnson is going to continue to move this money back right up to that luxury tax area for the Brooklyn Nets. So if they want to be able to make moves, specifically in free agency, non-trade moves, the money that Ben Simmons occupies is the biggest problem that they're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Curry, they're over the cap next year anyway. So I don't think it's like not till 2 years from now that they get way back under. But then there's going to be money coming on the books here too. Because like you said, if they think about signing Cam Johnson, I mean, after that, it's like unclear like what will happen. They probably are going into 24-25 with their powder pretty dry, depending on like what. Excuse me.
Can I ask you? Sorry, go ahead.
Getting choked up by the restricted free agency. I will say too, free agency is not really what it used to be. Like these guys don't hit free agency. The move now is you sign a deal and then ask to be traded. Like that's free agency, right? These guys all take their deals with their teams, like the first time around at least, right? Like they take the most money they can get with the team. I would do it too. I'm not knocking
even
them.
if just to request a trade afterwards, like just get
the money. It's like, and by the way, sometimes teams will tell you that they'll just like, hey, they definitely did it with like guys like Durant and stuff. Like it was like, hey, if you're not, just sign the deal. You're not happy, we'll trade you in 2 years. Like it's just fine. Like that. Like that's just kind of what happens. I'm not knocking anybody for doing it. It's just that why these free agent classes look like bad or just kind of veterans with maybe question marks, or guys like Kyrie, like at this point that are hitting free agency because they just couldn't figure it out with their current team. And with the Nets, they were like, hey, we're out of the Kyrie Irving business, and that's probably fine by us. But free agency is just not, it's really hard to make your team a lot better in free agency. Yes, like a guy like Brunson shows up every once in a while, but it's only usually because their team totally screwed up, like the Mavericks did with him. And he hit another level. So you really kind of got to get lucky, because you need the first team to brick it so hard that they just don't figure it out. And then he's got to be better than even kind of anybody thought they would be for it to work out. Because I think most times you're just kind of overpaying in free agency.
I'm going to double dip here on a Cam Thomas one just real quick. Is Cam Thomas the next Karis LeVert, or is he legit? I would say already in the small sample size from Cam Thomas, he's a better player. And this is kind of a podcast.
You think he's better than LeVert?
I would say that whatever you thought LeVert could be, I don't ever think that I looked at Karis LeVert and said, hey, this guy could really be a high level player with consistency. And that's mostly because the time when he played with the Brooklyn Nets was a time when you didn't have superstar talent. You didn't have the hierarchy you mentioned before. It was, hey, for what you got, this is a guy that when he's on the court, he can produce. And I love Karis LeVert, by the way. He was one of my favorite Nets at the time. I just always looked at him as like a good contributor, not necessarily a guy like Cam Thomas could be an elite level scorer in the NBA. Like I think that is on his hierarchy at some point. I never thought that about Karis LeVert, I guess would be my point.
Oh, Bubble Karis LeVert's got some things to say to you.
Well, you know what?
Bubble Karis LeVert was like, what are we watching here? Like it's like, Pete Maravich or something. No, but
DJ Warren, but that guy can't find minutes these days. Anyway, the other thing too would be just real quick here. This could be true. We don't know. Maybe a free burrito gets Cam Thomas to the studio.
Oh, Pepe. Anyway. Yeah, Locked On Nets over at Brooklyn Borough. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. It's getting late. Appreciate everyone jumping in on YouTube. Adam will be back with Kane Pittman tomorrow from talking a little Bucks Nets. So that'll be a fun one. Kane one of the best ones in the business. The true good guys in the old basketball talking. So I'm excited for Adam to talk to him. The rest of us will be back again on Friday talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.